Hey, Jim Bob. Thanks for doing
How?
this.
Hey, no problem.
So, yeah, pleasure to speak with you. I've been watching your stuff for a while now. And yeah, like I said, one of the reasons I got fired was for daring to include one of your funny pictures. So there's
Which
a nice
one? Which
connection.
one was that? Which picture was it?
Oh, it was the, is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, it's Super Day
That's
with a
hilarious.
little bit of pubic hair coming over the panties. Let's touch on what comedy is and what memes are and
Mhm.
why you were so good at them. So, I've got a couple of quotations here from a 17th, 18th century philosopher, Lord Shaftesbury. And I think his view of what comedy is actually works quite well for what you produce. He says that I'm sure the only way to save men's sense or to preserve wit at all in the world is to give liberty to wit. Truth may bear all lights. Nothing is ridiculous except what is deformed. And although people may be frighted out of their wits, they will never be laughed out of them. So he takes the view that true ideas will never be harmed by ridicule, but false ideas will be. And a lot of your
Mm.
work seems to be along those lines.
Yeah, totally. The key point in there, I agree with pretty much the whole thing, and I think the deformed part is really interesting because deformed today would be inverted, right? We would just look at what's inverted in the world, including the gender thing, whatever it is. A man is a woman is a man. Nothing's true. You're an elephant. It's absurdity that we're pointing to as comic creators, comedians, reporters. Now, I now recently take on the approach that in order to be a comedian or a satirical expressionist, all you have to do is be an honest reporter of reality, and you'll be have done the job because reality, the external world is at least in its highlighted points is absurd. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of really points to what we're all dealing with and why memes and comics and comedy and commentary is so important because you're really just shedding light. We're like, we hold flashlights basically, and we point to, we just highlight what's being presented as the case. And we don't have to work very hard to demonstrate its absurdity.
Yeah, the main effect that I get from looking at the way your memes are structured and the way the punchline is often set up by exactly what you described there, just shining a flashlight, reminds me again of this view that humans are built to appreciate order and harmony. And what you often do in your work is point to what is missing, where something doesn't connect properly, where it's incoherent.
Mm-hmm.
And it can get across through that method, I think, more effectively than it can through formal argumentation or an essay form or a lecture. You've got this great ability to condense it into sometimes just two slides.
Yeah, that part is because, and I think what's key to that is you could either argue within a paradigm and argue back and forth facts and logic. You take the the Ben Shapiro approach, the academia approach, or you attack the paradigm itself. And so that's why if you attack paradigms and show the absurdity, or let's say the logical conclusion of a said position, you can condense it really quickly, and the point will get across because it's actually attacking a paradigm, a world, a bigger scale worldview, a starting assumption, let's say. And so a lot of people get hooked into not ridiculing starting assumptions, rather participating in this back and forth sort of facts on facts ping pong game. Let's look at the stats. Let's look at the stats. Let's look at the essay. Well, this study said that. Well, this study. And not only am I not interested in that, but I think it's not even effective because you're always going to be interpreting the data or the study through your paradigm lens. So you'll always dismiss or accept something based on the lens that you're already wearing. So attacking the lens, or at least questioning the lens, is really the work, I think, the proper work of a comedian. And that's what a premise is. In the stand-up culture, you go on stage and you go, hey, how about airports, whatever, even if you go hacky with it, you're still starting with, well, let's all get into the same premise here, and then we can make jokes. And I think in comedy, especially, I've done very small amount of stand-up comedy, and it's enjoyable, but it's just not I don't want to spend time in bars and stuff. But what I did notice is that the current sort of cancel culture, to some extent, I call it premicide, because it's not that people are being forced to not say jokes. It's really, if you look closer, it's that they're trying to control the premise of the joke, not the joke itself. You can't say that premise. It's like something true about, let's say, trans issues, or something true about race, or something true about generalizing people based on their culture. And you're really, that's a premise. And a comedian, a good comedian, can't survive without being permitted at least to say a premise and check in whether it's a true premise or not.
Yeah, I think that is also why your work gets taken off social media sometimes, why it's offensive to people who don't like seeing the conclusions of the premises they accept revealed.
Totally.
A lot of it has the reductio ad absurdum, which is what makes it hard hitting. But that is what's required now, because that ping pong you describe, the second you step up to that table, you have dignified the game. Mm-hmm. And there's a weakness in that. I think there's actually a submission to it. So I think what you're doing is very effective. I noticed that one of the topics you've been discussing on streams recently is scientism, and the extent to which, unwittingly for many people, science itself has become a kind of surrogate religion. And you've been pointing out effectively that this involves faith, even if people have a very hostile emotional antipathy to that word. Once you dig down with the logic of it, with the questioning, it emerges that actually they do have faith in it. And this isn't, I would say, a particularly radical or new concept. If you go back to early modern philosophy with Nietzsche, for example, Nietzsche, who many of these people would look up to in many ways because of his perspectivism and seeing things as ultimately a matter of interpretation, which is essentially their worldview. He says that there's no such thing as science without any presuppositions. A philosophy, a faith must always be there first. It is a metaphysical faith that underlies our faith in science. And you can see that in so many different ways. It could be the reliability of the senses, for example. It could be the fact that the mind is rational, that the world is rational in such a way that the mind can know it. And we can go even further than that into the assumptions that science makes, like, for example, the uniformity of nature to justify induction. You've also got boundary conditions, brute givens in the cosmos, like the mass of a proton, the rate of expansion after the Big Bang. You often talk about the laws of logic. We've got the existence of numbers as well, even the existence of truth itself, and the idea that the results of experiments need to be reported honestly. All of these things aren't established by science. They're presupposed by it. Why is it, you think, though, that people have this idea that science doesn't involve any faith?
Because they have a sort of allergic mental reaction to the term faith or religion. They think that religion is not progress. They think science is progress, which is ironic because science can't tell you what progress is. You can't tell you where we ought to go, and science can't give you ought claims. And that's why where scientism really, the bedrock of it starts, which is the assumption that science can answer all the questions, but not only that, can tell us what we ought to do with the results. It can't tell you what you ought to do with the results. I always trap people quickly, and I just say, is science the best way to truth? And they'll quickly, a quick materialist, empiricist will just say, yeah. And I said, if that's true, did a scientific experiment, is that the result of a scientific experiment? And they get trapped and they get all, oh, you're just, like, no, this is fundamental. You're starting from a philosophy that has a teleological priority that you haven't, really grounded in anything, right? It's just an opinion at best from your worldview, or it's arbitrary, and then you just try to get people to agree with it. At least that's an honest approach to, let's say, a materialist, is they just go, well, no, there is no real direction, but we should abide by science and, seek progress. And you're like, on what grounds? And because I like it, like that's where it gets to. It's like, because I like it. And so, yeah, you're right. And this is ancient too. I think even it was present. Was it Plato who was like, he basically wanted an intellect's world, a world where the experts were the ruling class, a technocracy, really. And I'm sure that didn't go unquestioned, on what basis, like what, how can they answer these questions? Can technicians and engineers and the smart people who are figuring out math tell us deeper questions about the nature of being human, morality? Can they justify the existence of truth in the whole list of metaphysical things you just listed? And the answer is no, they can't.
Yeah. And even if every possible scientific question had been answered, then in principle, all the really important questions are still left totally untouched.
Yeah.
That's the thing that really hits home, I think, when people need to start thinking more carefully about exactly what the realm of science encompasses and then what it doesn't. And the point you made that, well, can science itself prove that science is the only way to access knowledge rationally? No, of course it can't. It's self-referentially incoherent.
Yeah, it also starts with all the assumptions that we seem to have knowledge of, right? That science doesn't. So like science relies on a whole metaphysical category of things, numbers, laws of logic, meaning, information, the near seamless interaction between mind, external world, and concepts. Like these things are not identical to each other, yet they participate in a sort of triad. Go ahead. Yeah, I just wanted to put that in there.
And you just reminded me, the irony is that science was stillborn pretty much everywhere apart from the Christian West. And it's born within that womb, that matrix of the world is made by a rational God, Logos, and the human mind partakes in that and can detect the patterns, detect the order. It isn't Maya or the veil of illusion like you get in some Eastern philosophies. It's not the work of an evil demon trying to trick us. So Christianity provided the basis for science. And yet we now see religion and science, specifically Christianity and science, as somehow hostile to each other. And the people who like science tend very much to dislike religion, and it's become a rival religion. And I would say that the origins of that are in the Enlightenment and the idea that the purpose of science is to achieve mastery over nature, and man can become a kind of god, eventually achieving not only mastery of physical nature, but also human nature as well. And you get this new kind of scientist who not only wants to understand the world, but dominate it and do the same with human nature too.
Absolutely. And also the infiltration into foundational religions with this concept of pure reason. We can get everything from rationale. I can justify faith in God through materialism, all of these other arguments that are fun to participate in, but really they're what we would call, the classical foundational approach, which is like, oh, well, look, it's look, the design in nature, look, the ontological argument, all of these things. And really that's arguing within the atheist paradigm, because you're still not justifying all your starting things that you're just borrowing ad hoc. And that's what the Enlightenment did, is really, to summarize it, in my view, of course, this is oversimplifying, but they basically said, we don't need to justify the laws of logic and all of these other things. They're just axioms or something like that. This is where we are now, where it's like, no, it's axiomatic. We don't need to justify reason and laws of logic, regularity. We just start from, that's a given. And obviously that's going to be incompatible with Christianity, really, when it comes down to it, because we really are participating in, I guess, in some form of God's mind. We're not God, but we're we're given some attributes or like some energies in say orthodoxy would say uncreated energies that we're it's permissible to interact with an intelligible world, right? And so and it's uniform, and not all of our perceptions are the same, but largely there's universals, right? There's universals we interact with. And we actually start from there. And then you get into like, I think it was Kant who was trying to say that there weren't universals. There's only particulars. And I know he meant it in a way that like, they're just concepts, but then you would just apply that to truth. Well, truth is just a concept. So is it real or not? And then you get into solipsism, and there's a lot of logical consequences that lead to absurdity from those views. But yeah, the Enlightenment was not really great for Christianity in the end, at least for those Christians who are like into it, because you're basically get into this class. Now we're in the political, fruit of it, right? Mm-hmm. Which is classical liberalism and Jordan Peterson and all of the very pragmatic views of things, right? Not faith-based, not ultimately driven by your desire to know God and to experience humility and all of these things, but rather to live a good life, quote, a useful life, a life where you do stuff and you get stuff and it's fun and you avoid harm and all this stuff. And really, I've been confronting this for the last 2 years too, is that, living a life that's preferable and winning, let's say in the game of pragmatic material life, is not always consistent with faith, right? It's your faith might be strong and you don't have any perks or amenities or food or your family, and you can be experiencing all sorts of horror, like absolute horror. And this is where we are today, is this kind of constant battle of trying to base morality in well-being and things that are good, and we like them, we like the things, and we have access to water and all this stuff, and it's really totally inconsistent with really the fundamentals, I believe, of Christianity, which are not based in these amenities and these conveniences.
Yeah, the religion, after all, is based on a man dying on the cross, and material comfort, wealth, and happiness has traditionally been seen as an impediment to spiritual progress. So I think you're wise to be suspicious of any path which encourages them as the main priority. And for most of human history, the good life has not been seen as the feel-good life. But now it is. You mentioned Peterson there. Mm-hmm. Why do you think he is a phenomenon? Because I see him as essentially high-grade secular self-help.
Absolutely. That's why. That's the answer. Is he's a phenomenon because we're in the outcome, the impact of enlightenment and pragmatism and all of the rationale and reasoning. So you get all these intellectuals, and I was one of them, and you get these centrists and these libertarians and classical liberals who are, nobody's really neutral in their desire to know divinity. And so that's why scientism still is a surrogate, because they want to make divinity the universe or some intelligence we're going to find or something. And I think the same applies to this middle sort of the fence-sitting centrist who seeks this foundation. And so here comes Peterson in his double talk, and he borrows the Christian skeleton and some of the foundational bricks and whatever, and then he adds his own Jungian intellectual stuff, fascia to the bones, right? He adds a different layer to the bones of Christianity and sells Christianity as a useful tool rather than something that you come to faith you using logic, right? But you don't know God through reason or logic, but through faith. But that it's not actually real. It's just useful. So it's real in a sense because it's kind of true metaphorically, and it's useful to have this backbone of structure. And you could see that he really grapples with that, or at least he acts very, convincingly that he grapples with it, in all the sobbing and stuff. And so I think he's a phenomenon because he's tapping into one man's given desire to know his creator, to know divinity as a personhood, and within himself too, and to actually ground something at least coherently in an argument as far as why rights can be argued, why dignity can be argued. And if they can get close to some sort of avatar of Christianity, it's enough for just modernity. It's enough for a conversation out with a friend at the bar, and someone will be, oh, that makes sense. It's you. Yeah, I could see that. It's pragmatic and useful. And he's also tapping into the self-help, the whole what is it? His one commercial, it was like, you know, you know, craft yourself, your own heaven and, in your own hell. And it's like this whole like self-creation of your life as if you're authoring your life. And that's the fundamental heresy I see, is that no, you're not the author. You're in someone's existing. There's only one story here from my view. There's only one personhood that we're in the story of, and we're sort of like some sort of mini. We're not gods uppercase, but we're seeking to be theosis. We're seeking to be God like, Christ like, and so no, we're not authoring our own. No, this isn't a self-authoring suite. That means that everybody's truth, that's Oprah level. That's everybody's truth is valid because they're self-authoring it. And so nobody's story can be incorrect, incoherent, wrong, immoral, good even, right? Because it's self-author. That's the irony, is he breaks down all of this like postmodern upside down world, and he argues for structure and coherency and the meaning of words stay true, yet he inverts words. And he also argues that everybody has their own truth, at least as a consequence. He doesn't actually say that. But what he's saying, what he's selling, that would be the consequence, is that everybody's self-authoring suite is correct. So you go, okay, I'm gonna sell. I love Jordan Peterson. I love that he said, self-author. I'm gonna self-author an authoritarian state, right, where this ethnicity is superior and this one's not, and we build up a militia, and our goal is terrestrial gain, right, into the into the sky even, right, not just terra, into the sky. And so he couldn't possibly go, well, no, that's not what I meant. It's like, well, all you did is give an empty slot to fill in. That's it. And that's the fundamental stopping point of his philosophy. And I think he knows it. I don't know if he gets in front of enough people who can actually tear it apart in a compassionate way, but I think he might know it's futile.
It reminds me of what you said earlier about what premises are being accepted by people like that who play ping pong. And fundamentally, what you've got at the root of it is a commitment to autonomy. And that is ultimately what liberalism is. Autonomy is the supreme good. So there's that proverb that error only really takes root in the shade of truth. It has to have a little bit of the truth in it to be really successful. That's what makes heresies last for centuries sometimes. So what you were saying there about the Christian skeleton in Peterson's outlook, I think is spot on. But ultimately, who is he telling people to get on their knees to and worship?
Effectiveness, their own will. Really, I mean, that's what it comes down to. Because even when asked, "Do you believe?" he goes, "Well, I behave as though it's true." And it's like that's just that's not faith. That's not humility. You're just borrowing a set of arbitrary prescriptions so that your life might turn out okay, right? Right. That's what he's selling. It's the worship of the will. He's selling human as God, man as God. And I think he might know it at some level. He might know it, but he might justify it by going, well, at least I'm getting people in the dialectic of Christianity, and that might be enough. And maybe they'll escape my perversions. Maybe that's how he looks at it, right? The speculation, but I could see him going, Well, I can do a lot. It's just that, people have to get away from me. I assume at some point he's going to have a breakdown and say, stop listening to me. I could almost see that in the near future.
The other topic that you like to talk about a lot, and in a very humorous way, is NASA. And you mentioned the idea of man as God as one of the explanations of the Peterson phenomenon, a kind of self-transcendence or apotheosis, but one that doesn't require any God to pull you up. You can just do it by cleaning your room and reading a few books, and then you've got this kind of Gnostic salvation by knowledge.
Totally.
But what do you think explains the emotional connection that people have to NASA as well?
It's transcendent. It's man can transcend the limitations of this limited temporal stage, right? And that it represents its ascension. It's NASA is ascension, lift up. It actually literally means, I think in Hebrew, lift up. And so I think if you really go to the core start of NASA, people often go to the Nazis and Operation Paperclip and Werner von Braun and all the stuff, which is fun. But you have to go even a little bit before with JPL and Jack Parsons. Jack Parsons, self-described Crowleyan Satanist, sex orgies, black magic, dark sex rituals and stuff like this. A son of Crowley, wrote him letters, had a little house where the rent would go straight to his father. He called him explicitly his father, Aleister Crowley, his father, in a religious sense, not in just a fatherly sense. He also had a strong disdain for his own father, but also Christ and the Father. Explicitly wrote about it, shared it. And so when you look at that and you go, okay, who is he hanging out with? Not just these people who are doing all this sex magic and stuff, but tied to the culture was what was considered the cutting edge science fiction community, science fiction writers, Robert Heinlein, who wrote all of these books about going to space. They merged together and basically said, wow, we can actually create the narrative, the illusion, the trick that there is ascension possible with rocketry, but also sexual, all of it. You could still to this day, all of NASA's stuff is sexualized, and sci-fi, and merge the two and be able to sell it to the people. And really, there's a lot more going on. Just like science is never free of some starting assumption, presupposition, philosophy, neither is space travel as we know it, right? All of it has this root, and it's really antichrist, but it's antichrist probably less and less overtly. They don't there's not much said about it. In fact, I just learned that they actually, just talking about the shade, what was the saying? The shade of the that a lie requires some truth.
Yeah, so the best heresies are around for so long because they have a little bit of the truth in them.
Right. Yeah. And so I recently found out that many of NASA's employees and scientists are not nearly required, but really urged to read a very giant book that I just got a hold of called The Chronicles of Michael the Great, who is a patriarch of the Orthodox Church, who branched off a little bit, I think, of the Antioch and went into or some Oriental branch of Orthodox. But nonetheless, his book, the book that he wrote, is a massive book. And basically, it's the universal story of creation on from the start until now. You go, well, why would they? I thought NASA and all those people hate religion. I thought they're against religion. I thought they don't want to know about this. No, they're much to do with occultism, gnosis. That the world and spirituality can be obtained from within. But also directed and given by numerology, wordsmithing and all this stuff. And so they do participate in some weird hybrid religion. I think based on what I've seen, it's like Kabbalism mixed with old Jewish mysticism, or which is similar, right? But and then they always appeal to some level of Christianity, because I think they might know that a personalized entity is essential in people's appeal, or at least their desire to know God. So what does know God mean? I mean, it's always personhood. How do we know each other? Through personhood. And so that's why I think they're going to actually start to sell us contact with intelligence. I think that's the next psyop. I think they're preparing the seeds for that by saying, like, well, we found all the necessary DNA out there. We found all of the necessary components to start life. This satellite is now picking up very strange, they start planting the UFO-y overlapping with this intelligence. And what's interesting is that all of these books, like by Heinlein, they point to this stuff. Even Stanislaw Lem wrote a book called His Master's Voice, which was about NASA, searching for this neutron stuff and neutrino and all this stuff. And then they finally make contact with some obscure patterns of information. And what does that do? It's the same. What it establishes is what NASA already established itself as, which is the surrogate translator for the things in the cosmos, the heavens, the translator, the buffer, let's say the lawyer. Like lawyers are to written law, as NASA is to understanding what we look up and go, holy crap, like this is we can't fathom. And they go, we'll translate it for you in very simple terms and animation. I think they're going to do that again with His Master's Voice sort of setup, where they report to us that they think they have something here, folks. And then we're just waiting, everyone's waiting. What are they going to translate? And from that, it becomes sort of like this directive, this Wizard of Oz behind the curtain directive, right? And it's beyond AI, I guess, because AI, all those AI people, there will also be parallel to that narrative is the technocrats and the transhumanists, who aren't the same exact ilk, I don't think, as NASA. Maybe they overlap. And I think they're going to also be battling it out with NASA. NASA wants to go transcendental, even if they fake it. They'll be like, it's still real, and the transhumanists will go, no, we're actually going to create an AI King Solomon, right? Another King Solomon who's given all the knowledge. And and this King Solomon AI central command hub is going to be able to spit out prescriptives based on the knowledge it has that you don't have. I don't have it. You don't have it. We're not smart enough, guys. But they're going to tell us what the likely futures are and what to do and what to say and what not to say. And I think those two will, the irony is that they'll battle each other while we, the meek, watch, right? They'll battle each other as far as who's going to secure the absolute voice of God, the inversion of God's voice. God created in man's image.
Yeah, the inversion there is a recurring pattern. You mentioned it at the start with transgenderism, even to some extent feminism, is about the inversion of the traditional order of the family with the man as head. Now, if you look at most adverts or films coming out of Hollywood, the father is portrayed as a fool, like Homer Simpson or worse. And the wife is the competent head of the family. So they can't just subvert. They have to actually invert. That's the end goal. And that's the distinction between Luciferianism, which is the challenge to legitimate authority, the challenge to order. And then Lucifer becomes Satan after that and actually inverts it. So the ultimate goal is man as God. And transhumanism quite explicitly aims at that. You've mentioned it there in connection with NASA. Julian Huxley, brother of Aldous Huxley, Brave New World, wrote New Bottles for New Wine in 1957. And he said that he believed that through the biological and social sciences, man can control his own evolution and is suddenly appointed, this is his phrase, managing director of the biggest business of all. So man's in charge now. We can control the future, and the elites, the technocrats who are running the show can then impose their vision. So it's man made in the image of them.
Absolutely, yeah, because they're the ones imagining, again, what their goals are. So it's their own image of themselves, and then they project it on to these systems. Let's say even today, like mRNA. It's not about like, oh, stop sickness. No, it's about directing your own biology and crafting and treating yourself, your body, as an operating system, and getting updates and infiltrating it and inverting it, like Tesla dude, Elon Musk says, well, we could turn people into a butterfly maybe in the future. You're like, that's exactly what it is. It's illumination. It's being the light, the source of all knowledge of the body and mind and stuff, and accessing some sort of like connect to brain, universal mind even is really the end goal of that approach, which is, it's not just our singular bodies. It's, they want to just skip ahead to the internet of bodies, the internet of all things, which would be the internet of the mind. And it's all like fantasy based, a lot of it, which is funny because we get spooked and scared and we start, spiraling into the defending and being like, you can't do this. It's important to understand that because they're always borrowing from truth and inverting, there's always a lie to what they say they're getting toward. Even if we can conceptualize it as something real, like even if you and I can go, well, yeah, I can see in their view that that's a possibility and that's frightening and gross and I don't like it. But like, I always encourage people, the moment they get fearful, their faith is gone. Like a reminder that we're not self-authoring sweets. So ironically, to battle them, we're arguing that we're now crafting our own reality. And the battle is between man and man crafting reality. That's a trap, right? And I think their spiritual warfare, that side of things, actually tries to pull people into that ping pong game where it's two men going, no, I'm the creator of everything, and what you're creating is bad. And you go, why? And you go, I'm Christian, it's bad because of this. And then you're like, you don't realize you're actually also arguing to become God. And so that becomes a very interesting tension that I've seen with myself and these communities of like truthers and stuff, is how much you participate in a game, a material game, that you're avoiding an outcome, but also admitting you're not seeking a material outcome, because that would then be inconsistent with the spiritual realm of knowing God, scripture, prophecy, where this all goes inevitably beyond our control and authorship. It's beyond us. But we're also we're constantly drawn into, well, I got to author the anti-author. I'm the anti-author of that. Bill Gates. I'm going to anti-author him. And you go, oh, it's a trap. But it's not like you don't participate either. So that's a question I don't even have the answer for. I think that's this sort of like constant seesaw that we experience in life of how much we submit and how much when there is to fight, and there are times to fight, and it's discernment. And that's where actually faith and humility comes in. It's that you have faith that you'll have the discernment, and you could be wrong in this process of battling good or battling evil with good, but also remembering, at least, this is fundamental to my core beliefs, is that the battle of good and evil is not flesh and blood. And when we talk about all this stuff, it's super interesting to point it out, to try to put sticks in the spokes of their wheels, right? I think that's appropriate to do. But ultimately, you can't rid the world of the source of where this comes from, which is man wanting to be God. You can stop some of the progress of man trying to become God, but you can't remove that element of human, because that's the fallen nature. That's our fallen state. And so it's I see people, at least, who battle this stuff, and rightly so, and we agree on a bunch of things, but sometimes I see them go toward, well, we got to do something about it and eliminate they go into this elimination phase where they're like, germ theory, get them, eliminate them, and then we'll stop it. And then we'll finally have our society that we want. And that's a trick. That's a devil's trick too.
Yeah. What you've said there had me thinking about the Manichaean worldview of an equally powerful good and evil God battling it out. And you can get pulled into seeing what's called the culture war. I think that's a poor phrase for it, because ultimately it's a spiritual war.
Yeah,
it's
totally.
not left, right, it's heaven and hell. But if you take it too seriously, you are putting it on the same plane, on the same level, as if you've got these two powers, as in Manichaeanism. Whereas what you really have is order, and then the absence of it, disorder. And you can just trust in the long run that no matter how frightening it might seem to begin with, ultimately reality will bat last, and these things haven't got the legs to sustain themselves, as history shows. There's that great line from that old 90s film Blade with Wesley Snipes in. At the end, he just says, before he kicks the vial of poison into this strange vampire that's been invented, he says, some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate uphill.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. That's ultimately what you see every time, is the new project, the ice skating uphill. And you just have to wait for it to start sliding back down again and collapsing, while doing what you can to undermine it, but not being afraid, because when you're afraid, you can't think clearly, you don't act well.
Yeah. When you're afraid, you participate in their game based on their rules, and then you end up ice skating uphill, chasing them uphill. Why would you chase someone ice skating uphill? Like, you don't need to pull them down. It's true, but it's because what they're doing is borrowing some truth, and that's why the Manichaean, that view, it's even like very sort of Buddhist in a way. I think it's Buddhism, where it's like this equal, everything's even, just this even battle, and like you said, evil can only be the absence of something, just like darkness is the absence of light. It doesn't have it might have its own thingness when we are vacant of good. Like, we become the thingness because we're animated creatures, and so we can actually impact the world, and we can say, okay, the actions of a person fully vacant of good, of God, doing the work of his own will, you could say that's evil, but not identical. Like, in other words, you couldn't kill them and get rid of that, but they can in a way embody that. So I guess in a sense you could say there is evil, but it's always defined as the absence or privation of good. You can never define it on its own thing. And that's why that view, that equal view of the battling, doesn't work. Also, what you said is interesting, the skating uphill. I always look at let's say, like, these strong atheists who are arguing the non-existence of something that they believe doesn't exist, and how silly it is to spend time arguing about the non-existence of something you already think doesn't exist. And it's like a liar living their life arguing that truth doesn't exist. Like, they're like, I'm a liar, and then they're arguing that truth doesn't exist, and you're like, well, you can't fully ground that your own participation in your life, because you need the truth. Like, you can't be a liar without the truth. And that's like skating up, a lot of ways like skating uphill, because you're just constantly arguing something that you need. You need the truth to even do your inversion. And so that's why you don't just sit and wait, but you watch and observe and use your discretion and your discernment and prayer, and again, hope that you do the right thing at the right time and such. But ultimately, there's nothing to really panic about, because it's all based on all the smart city stuff too. It's all based on the false premise that humans' ultimate really foundational desire is to just have conveniences and have stuff. If it's false. It's just totally false. That's not our desire. If you look at all of the places, find some poor family community in at the base of a mountain in Peru, and it's in their daily routine to get what they need, but it's not like their pursuit is given by their conveniences, their happiness in life. Let's say, even if I wouldn't agree with their theology, whatever it be, is that it's not given by just getting stuff, right? Getting the fish or getting the thing or doing the sheep. These are all just things that we're doing daily, but that's not what connects us to other people. It's not the thing, right? The thing is metaphysical. It's transcendental. That's love, compassion, understanding, overcoming anger, anguish, long suffering, sacrifice. These are not found in a tree. They're not found in any sort of scientific, method or a flask. And this is fundamentally what people need to be reminded of, is that they even your opponents, the technocrats, the Luciferians, the Satanists, they all are also still appealing to transcendental categories. Always. Just like in the beginning of this conversation, the scientism, its foundation is an ought, a telos, some future that can't be grounded by an experiment.
You mentioned about what the goal is and the kind of culture that looks like it's going to be imposed. And Huxley wrote about one single body of knowledge, ideas, and attitudes. He used the phrase, a single organic world, society, and culture. I presume that idea of uniformity is to do with efficiency, and everyone's like the ideal consumer. This is the kind of thing you need for a society just built around pleasure, happiness, utility. Uniformity isn't the same thing as unity. I don't think there'll be any kind of harmony or unity in that kind of world. There'll be uniformity without unity. And Musk's brain chips and the body augmentation that you spoke about, they'll be thinking about ways to try and bring about this new Superman figure. But the line from something called a Cyborg Manifesto, Dr. Donna Haraway, it's written in the mid-'80s. A cyborg manifesto is that the cyborg is a creature in a post-gender world, an ultimate self, untied at last from all dependency, a man in space. Now,
yeah.
couple of things I wanted you to comment on there. First one,
it's just so perfect. It's almost like it's like a Babylon Bee doing satire of what these people like, encapsulating everything that's ridiculous to us when we look at it, but they're serious. They're actually serious about it. And it's like, yeah, that's the whole trans thing. People think it's about, people identify. No, that whole thing is just a premise to accept people as its, right? If you're not a he or a she, you're not an animal now. The next phase is like animal. I'm not a human. I'm a donkey. Like whatever it is, it goes to it. And that's what's kind of the Faustian deal about it, is that I always put it in the context of like they finally get humans into a fully immersive virtual world, right? And all these people have been battling to be seen as their identity, right? I'm a this, I'm a that. You can see, and they'll get this virtual world platform where they can finally be seen how they want to be seen. Well, the joke of it is, once that world is established, the person who's viewing them can determine how they want to see them. So in other words, finally, I want to be seen as a rainbow donkey, unicorn, elephant, whatever. And I'm gender fluid, whatever. I go in the world and I go, oh, that's interesting. I see you as a fire hydrant. Like, you're just a fire hydrant. Like, not only that, I don't even hear you. Like, whatever you're saying, I just tune you out. I have the presets. So anyone who thinks they're a unicorn is a fire hydrant. That's my reality. And so that's what's so silly about it, is that it's sold through this lens, through this desire for people to be their own gods ultimately, but let's say at a superficial level, to be seen how they want to be seen. And I'm a this and I'm a that. Well, no, the goal is to be an it. For the people who are selling this future, they want you to see yourself as an it, not as a person, not made in the image of God, but an it, made in the image of man, made in the image of Superman, a Superman, an AI. And again, it's just the Ubermensch again, except it's with fully tech and AI stuff, where you sell people on what's possible. Yet none of these people who are pushing it would want to be the person, right? You know, this is what's going to be funny about it, is that it's always going to require some useful idiots to get their brain chips and stuff. And all of these people who are pushing it are, you're going to be like, oh, Elon, you want to eliminate your self identity and be a hive mind? Well, no, I need to, someone needs to oversee the thing. They're going to say things like that. You don't want to go into full monism, oneness world. You want to still be you, right? Yeah, I think that's reasonable. And it really is all sold to these people. And similarly, this whole idea of uploading consciousness, they don't even know what consciousness is, by the way. It's like they can't isolate it. It's a category. It's a abstract notion that requires consciousness to even determine what it is. So it's always going to be some begging the question of circularity. What's consciousness? And you're like, well, so consciousness told us what consciousness is, and how did we know outside of consciousness what consciousness is? This is the problem with simulation theory. The problem with God being all things, identical to all things. Like your glasses are God, basically, from this view. And this whole approach to oneness is so silly, because once you're in what they call oneness, you're gone and you can't determine that you're in oneness. So it's got a philosophical problem. So people will always want to know who they are in the matter of things, right? They always want to know who they are, because we're interested in ourselves in a way. And it's our way, it's our tool to know other people as well, is that we hold the law of identity, that I'm not you. We reject solipsism to get to any truth. And so this whole world is based on a solipsistic pursuit to turn all people into one thing, but give them a temporary interface that gives them the illusion that they're not one thing, but they're actually still themselves, but really they're not. And it's also silly. It's so silly. And you'll get people probably in our lifetime agreeing to in a very much like what was that, the Haley Bop, where the people all wore Nikes and Haley Bop was going to come save them, and they took poison. Similar to that, people will be sold that they can be uploaded, right? And they'll line up and be like, well, I'm not even living that good of a life now, so just give me my soft, painless injection, and I can't wait. And that's the Faustian deal, is that you don't exist. Like you think you exist, and that they're going to come through on their end of the bargain and reproduce you as a consciousness inside of a Rubik's cube, right, on a table at your grandson's house or something like that. And you're not. I can't wait till Charlie plays with me again. And yet you just won't exist. It won't be you. It'll just be a shitty sim of you that stutters on Tuesdays. Whatever glitch is in the system on Tuesday. Be like, I don't want to talk to Grandpa on Tuesday. You're like, why not? Did you see the glitch? And it's like, yeah, but it's still Grandpa. And you're like, these people really think there's no difference between the spirit of someone, the energies, the transcendental qualities, and just inputs. This Sam Harris approach, we're just inputs. No real free will is possible. And this is, yet they never take on their own ideology. They don't really behave consistently with that. No one actually believes that.
Yeah, and that idea of a human who is untied at last from all dependency, that is to cease to be human. When we're born as babies, we're dependent on our mothers, on our families, and then as they grow older, they depend on us. So dependency and that network of relationships is ultimately what human reality entails. And this idea of the man in space shows, I think, that cyberspace, the multiverse, really has something about it that's deeply connected to outer space exploration as well. It's part of the same dream. And the final expression, as they see it, of this autonomy. You can be liberated from being bound to the Earth's surface through space exploration. You can also be liberated from your body through cyberspace exploration. And either way, there's no limits. And we've finally broken free of our status as mere creatures.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like a wet dream. It's just literally something that is man's best attempt at conceptualizing what God is, and it's still a failure. It's still weak. It's still not all-knowing. It's still broken. Why? Because all of it's still based on the broken, limited logic and reasoning of man. And so that's what's so funny about it. It's sad, but it's also funny because, you know, this attempt is always going to be rooted in a starting point that we're fallen. And even if you rejected Christianity and the fallen state of man and just took just the approach that, you know, the concept that you're going to be not limited presupposes limitations. So the very construct of what you're creating would necessarily have its limitations because you couldn't build it if it didn't have limitations. In other words, you would just have a wand from Harry Potter that totally didn't require abiding by any laws of nature, physics, logic, software programming. That's what's so silly about it, is that it's the same thing with AI. There's no artificial intelligence. There's augmented intelligence, which is built on the starting assumptions of what intelligence is based on man's conception and man's limitation. We create inputs and structures that mimic our idea of what that is. So it's always given by us, the directive, right? Us giving what it is, right? It's always going to be based. And even if they argue that it can trail off, right? Like, that's what's funny about this whole unlimited thing. Like, they sell the unlimited. What they're saying is, come with us until you don't exist. You wouldn't even be aware of your own identity based on their view. You wouldn't have you separate from someone else going, wow, we really transcended here. Like, that's what's so silly about the singularity, is that if that was a real thing, in reality, in actuality, there would be no single person who was able to discern that it was in fact the singularity, because there would be no distinctions. There would be no universals. It would just be this sort of nebulous cloud, right? Where no one was really truly them, because that would change. One day you'd be you. Another day you'd be a floating, flying cosmic refrigerator. There's no coherency. It's selling a reality that's not a reality, but it's selling a reality that's indistinguishable as a reality, really, at its core.
The primordial soup becomes
right.
the omega as well as the alpha then.
Totally. That's so well put. That's exactly it. Back to the beginning, like this, man created omega. Yeah. The beginning and the end, alpha and omega. And it's just this soupy gray sludge. And you're in the universe, but you're also just on Earth as a gray sludge.
Yeah.
And you're nowhere, but you're everywhere. But there's no you also.
Yeah.
How could you create a fundamental reality without constraints?
And the warning signs are here, though, because if you mix all the colors of the rainbow together, you get brown.
Right. You do. You get brown, except for light. You mix them to, in light, you get white. You mix all of this. And that's the difference between what is it? I forgot what it's called. There's two separate theories of color, and one's with light and one's with paint. And the paint one, the material, turns to sludge and black. The light one, not to go like Luciferian, but it's like, you mix that whiteness is the combination of light. And, it's just interesting that light's not identical to material. And there's that distinction right there between materialism and something that's beyond our concept, because we don't even actually understand light still to this day.
That's deep, isn't it? In the Bible, light is the first creation.
And the sun and the rainbow is the sign, is the promise. So the promise wasn't, I promise to create, what do you call them? When people make paint, what's the thing you add, the additive or whatever, it doesn't matter. Basically in ancient paints, like he didn't promise to give you a good supply of paint, colors that you can mix together and make brown. That wasn't the promise. Yeah, that's it. It's really interesting though, that dichotomy, that little comparison there. We're talking about the same colors. The colors of paint are still the frequency. The light is bouncing off of red, and it's giving us what we call red, that most of us see as red. And yet you mix them and it's just sludgy black, brown, black, gray, gross, nothing. And yet the same principle with another medium, it produces a complete opposite.
Well, let's hope they don't make the technology and then forget about it like they did with the moon technology.
Oh yeah, you don't want to forget about that. Just do it 3-5 times. Dune buggies and all. I mean, to fit a fold-up dune buggy, for no other reason than to do donuts and rooster tails on TV. You don't want to forget that. I mean, that's it's just so. I get to the point where I'll get confronted about, you really don't believe? I'm like, no, let's swap it. How about you really believe that happened? Like, that's what I do now. You really believe that? Because they always try to gaslight you. I think we should start gaslighting a lot more, right? Because that pressure really ends up being the thing that people, they look around, and if they're in the middle and they're just soft, they'll go, well, who's better at pressuring? Who's better at gaslighting people about their starting assumptions? And I just think anybody who thinks that occurred that long ago, and yet we can't do anything even near it, right? And it's so many inconsistencies. You can send a rover 130 million miles away, but you can't send a guy, a team, a group of comedians to the moon after this long, right? For what reason? Well, we don't have their spacesuits are not, there's this flange in the spacesuit we can't figure out. You're like, how long are they going to do this for? Until people go, yeah, maybe it is. What's their term limit? Is it 100 years and they can't do it? Is that enough for my grandkids to be like, Grandpa is right? I mean, I thought they were going to do this again, and that would show that he was wrong. And what if 100 years passes, right? And they're like still making up excuses of why they can't land a man on the moon, right? That should be enough. 100 years.
Yeah, this is an interesting topic, and it amuses me that some people who claim a commitment to free speech, and I know would like to interview you, daren't, because of what you've just said, because they can't handle the pressure of even being seen to speak to someone who's willing to question it. So I know what you said about pressure is 100% accurate. There's a real cowardice, purely because of the social pressure on the topic. But yeah, the term there is a great question. How long is long enough before you start to get alarm bells ringing? And the official explanation, Elon Musk dropped it a while ago in an interview, is that we've just forgotten how. We've forgotten the technology.
Yeah, he said we forgot how to make aqueducts. No, we didn't. People could make aqueducts. We understand how aqueducts work and how they were built in Rome. We don't need them because we substituted that technology with something else that's unseen. And so you didn't even, I could argue that you didn't even really get rid of them. You just put them underground and changed the hardware. But that concept that people just accept that he's saying that, right? We built this, we forgot. We built the aqueducts, we forgot. Well, we went to the moon, we just forgot how to go. That's almost mockery, honestly. That's almost like something he might feel he has to say at this point because now he understands. Now he's on the team, right? Before he may have been not on the team. He may have been actually sincerely interested in privatizing and doing this. And then out comes Neil Armstrong and the other dude, and they go to Congress and appeal it and go, no, you can't do this. This is dangerous. You're not allowed to do this. And he's like, what? I thought this was the point. You know, you do it first, and then people do it better, and there's progress, and we get into space and we populate Mars, and all this stuff is dreams. We're gonna come true. And they go, no, you can't. And then they strike a deal and say, well, you can do kind of something like that, and NASA will be your funding. We'll give you $1 billion. And under that contract, we'll be a part of overseeing what it is and isn't, as opposed to your free reign to do it. You notice that all the other people who were trying to do this, like Branson and stuff, notice how all of the excitement, it got squashed, I think, because of some knowledge. Whether they are willing to talk about it or whether they're threatened, I don't know. It doesn't matter, because the social pressure alone, I think, is enough. You don't need threats. Oh, you really think people are getting threatened? No, they don't even need a threat. They just need their status threatened socially. It's true. You saw this with the last 2 years of the corona nonsense, is that people couldn't even question the narrative without potentially getting disowned, fired, ostracized from their own family or work. And if that occurs at the level of getting the sniffles, I mean, can you imagine? I mean, you said it yourself. There are people who even reached out to me who are bigger people. Oh, I want to talk to you. I think, you know, they do a little due diligence, or someone, you know, they ask someone, they go, oh no, he talks to Owen Benjamin, and he has flat earthers talk on his thing. And, he doesn't believe in the moon, all this stuff. And it's like poison. It's like poisoning the well, right? You can't even think about some of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
You know, you can't even think about, you're not allowed to even engage with some people who hold a different view that you would say is absurd. It's like, why not? Why not?
And just for anyone listening who has a knee-jerk reaction to the stance that Jimbob is taking on the topic of questioning it, NASA themselves admit that they haven't got a single photo of the Earth as a globe from space. They say in the small print on all of them that it's all artists' representations. And not many people know that, because they haven't even felt the need to inquire or dared to look. And if you bring that fact up in some conversations, it's amazing watching the mind-boggling effect it has on people who feel like something very dear to them has been threatened, even though they'll claim in other areas to be all for inquiry and critical thought, etc.
Yeah, people fundamentally can't grasp that that dogma isn't peculiar to theology or some sort of like philosophical view. Dogma, I think the first dogma is what is reality. And this not that it's constructed, that it can be changed. It's just that people can, because we're born into an accepted view of reality. It's not our choice. We're born as babies. Whatever our parents kind of dictate, or at least agree to some extent, the nature of reality is at a level they can't interact with, space level, large scale levels where you can't observe directly. To their credit, they just take a pragmatic approach. You know, what am I going to do if I can't prove it or disprove it, whatever it be, what stars are, what Earth is, how the system's working? Then they might just very well, at least 80-90% of people will just take a sort of soft acceptance approach, at least, because they don't see any need to do otherwise. And that's actually reasonable. It doesn't mean it's true. Anything's true. It just means most people do take a pragmatic approach. And I would even argue from the religious Christian view is that it's not really the ultimate path to take to figure out the nature of hard reality, physicality, materialism, and that you might know more, and that might bring you closer to God, knowledge of God, right? Which is important. But if it doesn't bring you closer to knowledge of God, you should find a different path toward knowledge of God. If materialism is getting you into this endless, what do you call it? A fractal adventure where you just keep going. You just keep going into what is nature? What is physicality? How do we get into the truth of the matter? If you try to, I recently talked, I don't know if you saw the stream, this dude came on and we were talking about straight lines in nature, whether they exist, and whether anything is actually straight, whether geometry itself, not a lens of geometry, but geometry itself is found in nature, like identical to nature. And I was arguing it doesn't, that we're always perceiving through these absolute lenses, like geometry itself. But a lot of times they're just pointing to universals like circles, but is there a perfect circle, right? In this case, and people react to that in different ways. This one person was reacting as if the consequence to not having a straight line, or in his case, the consequence of water not being perfectly flat and level, right? He thought the consequence of that is that God's not perfect, or that that means nothing is really true. And that's not actually true, but I understand someone might take that approach. And again, I'm pointing to the pitfalls of trying to seek absolute truth in matter. That absolute truth is conceptual. And I believe that absolute truth must be a being. It actually must be tied to an absolute mind who embodies, who emanates, who is the source, as opposed to the flatness of such a thing in the world is identical to absolute truth. And that's how we know truth exists, is because there's flatness and things drop, and there's math and the geometry of the world. The world is not perfect. It's perfectly fine enough for us to participate in this temporal state, but that's a trap. And so that goes out to anybody who's even willing to participate in conversations about like the nature of reality, gravity, Earth's shape, the cosmos, how things operate. And it's fun, but I urge people to watch out for when that becomes their spiritual task, is rooted in pursuit of the knowledge, the tree of knowledge. And that is the tree of knowledge. And so you have to watch out for that, because that's not what in my view, what we're here for. We're to partake in the tree of life, not the tree of knowledge.
There's that great line in the Gospels: which of you by taking thought can add 1 cubit to his stature? And it's primarily an adventure of changing your will, changing your heart, rather than just understanding things intellectually. If your spiritual life becomes a kind of intellectual game about debating people on Twitter or whatever, then you probably got it wrong.
Right. Absolutely. And I'm someone who's always vulnerable to that, because I am intellectual. I do like to talk about this stuff. And so that's my own battle as well. I don't think it's my greatest battle, but it is there. It's like, oh, go into that world and then battle it out. And these atheists and these materialists hold these views, and I'm doing God's work by battling it. But if you're only battling it intellectually, even if you think you won, if you turn that person further away from what you believe to be the truth of the matter, which is God-given, then you're not really, are you really doing God's work? It's like, people, attack me times like, because I believe a Trinitarian view of God, and I have friends, someone like Owen, who goes after it hard in the way he does. It's like people attack me now for not like doing some sort of like dedicated stream to debunk it, and like going, and I'm like, he's my friend. It's like, if my brother took a view that I disagree with, do I dedicate a stream to doing some sort of like mashup owning thing? And I'm like, no, that's not the way. That's not how I'm directed scripturally. Yes, to some extent you are directed to call out something or a heresy or this or that, but also that's more general. Like, if you're dealing with a person who like, you have to use your discernment and prayer and how to best, because your goal can't be to convert an idea of something, right? Like that does, if someone just takes the Trinitarian approach out of a logical argument, it doesn't mean they know God better. They just agreed to an argument. It's like the two aren't necessarily the same. And I think people miss out on knowledge, intellectualizing, winning, owning, versus like, well, what are we really doing? Like if you take a Christ approach, it's like if Christ was walking around and someone was like, whatever, like that's insane. Like, God, Father, three persons. It's like, what? He wouldn't be like, okay, I'm going to do a live stream now. I'm going to actually, let's go onto this stage, right? And gather all the people around to do their thumbs up and thumbs down, Rome-like gladiator spiel. That's just, to me, that's just not what I'm.
Well, they did that with Barabbas, didn't they? And he lost.
Barabbas, yeah, totally. Barabbas, exactly. Exactly. That's perfect. It's like that really does embody this modern world of competing views and all of us participating, and yet there's this element of the constant Barabbas. We're just constantly turning each other into Barabbas. In a way, you can take someone's approach, and if you think they're correct about theology, you can turn them into Barabbas, even, right? you could even go, they might be right about the theology, but then you're almost putting your worship onto the person you believe is right intellectually about it, or they have the right interpretation, or they say it better. And you're like, well, this isn't identical to sharing the gospel in the way that we know to do it, which is ultimately it is scripture, but it's also interactions with people and knowing each other and being able to use compassion and time and patience and all this other stuff that deals with the overall lifelong challenge of knowing God and hopefully getting closer. And so, that approach seems to be a consequence, or at least a symptom of the modern tech, which enables us, but also we fall into this like, again, I just keep thinking of the image in Rome where we're all in the crowd and we all have a thumbs up button or a thumbs down button, and we're like, it's just sound. It's like, and it doesn't change the fate of, in this case, actually, which would make it different than Rome, is it doesn't change the fate of the person battling. Let's say it's a theological battle of good or who's true or what's the true tradition and so forth. The screaming from the fans doesn't alter the trajectory of the person who's trying to question it, right?
And the foundational assumption there actually suggests a kind of prideful view of the capabilities of the human intellect anyway,
right?
Because we're not pure logic, rationality creatures. People can be presented with the truth step by step in a formal argument with everything valid, everything sound, and still not be convinced, still not believe. So the idea that you think you can almost take someone's face and rub their nose in the truth and say, do you see now? Now
like
do you
a dog.
the Trinity? Yeah.
Like a bad dog, smell your shit. Yeah,
exactly.
Even in the other side of things, you can show you can't show people a miracle, but a miracle could occur to someone, and that might not even be enough. So I don't know why we are so headstrong on these arguments, like this using rationale and reasoning. In fact, it all comes down to faith anyway. So it's like you might use an argument to make someone think a little bit different about their starting assumptions or about what is and isn't possible. But they have to eventually get there by their own practice and willful attempt to know God, not to understand, right? But to know. Like, that's a different thing. Like, I can know someone and not fully understand them, right? Mm-hmm. I could know someone and know, not judge their heart, but get a sense of who they are based on their energy and where they are in the world and how they say things and how they father and all of these things. And it's accumulative. It's not this argument. It's not like an argument, right? It's not propositional logic. And this is where people get trapped in general theological discussions, as they get into these atheist circles and they'll start trying to argue for God in a proper, premise, conclusion, these kind of models. And really, that's not a good attempt, because then you're reducing God to a conclusion that's given by our silly, limited way of reasoning about the world. And so, it's not identical. And the same applies to trying to use logic to fully conceptualize or come to a conclusion about the nature of God and how he exists. Even if you argued in a non-Trinitarian sense, you'd still be limited by the same thing, right? Like, and so that's a flaw, I think, is trying to understand the full essence of God through equations, math, some silly formal logical argument. If you accept God exists and he's all powerful, then he could very well transcend and actually, to be consistent, would likely transcend our limited reasoning of what things are and aren't. And the problem of the one and the many, I don't know if you've covered that with people, is that to me, God would necessarily transcend our understanding of reality, which is pretty much governed by logic and one and many things, universals and particulars, and how we make sense of the world. Like, that's a tree. And you're like, is that all trees? And it's like, no, that's a tree. Do you need to know the particular tree it is? No, it's tree. It's got treeness. There's a universal treeness to it. We can get deeper into the particulars of the tree, but I don't need the particulars to know it's a tree and it's not a dog. But with God, or if you try to take this approach, you could take an apophatic approach to logically discern what's not God, right? But you couldn't really get to the wholeness. That would be inconsistent with the separation of creation and creator. And people don't like that. They go, oh, then it's shrouded in mystery. Then that's a convenient. It's like, it's not convenient. It's a consequence. It's a consequence.
And mystery in the strict sense, as not being irrational, but as too rational for us to fully grasp because of our nature as created beings, which is like the point about dogma too. It's not like a roadblock to thought. It's not stopping you thinking. It's more like scaffolding. It's points to assist. But the point you made about getting people to question starting assumptions, and at best, sometimes all you can do is disconcert or take away the smug sneer when a particular viewpoint is addressed. I think that's what your memes are doing so powerfully and why people enjoy them. It's been really great talking to you, and I'm very thankful for your time. I know you're a busy guy and you've got lots to do, so I'll let you get on, but I'd love to speak to you again sometime.
Yeah, actually, I would like to have you on my podcast or my stream one day, and we'll talk about. I would even be open to discussing this exact topic just over again in a different environment with other people asking questions. Because I'll definitely, if I have a way to get this and post it on my YouTube, I think this is a conversation that people would really get a lot out of.
All right, cool. Thanks a lot. Speak to you soon. All right, bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Hello.
Say hi and bye. They're coming to rescue me from my mind. All right. Thanks a lot.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.